We are ready for our final session of the morning. But before we get started, let's first recognize the sponsors to whom we are so grateful for their support. Thank you to Amazon Web Services, Red Hat, Trend Micro, Checkmarks, and of course our host, TSPi. And now, let's bring in our moderator for the DevSecOps panel, a respected thought leader in the federal IT community. This gentleman is founder and president of Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. He's two-time winner of the Federal 100 Award, a prestigious honor that recognizes government and industry leaders who play pivotal roles in federal IT and make a true difference in the way technology transforms the government. He is the co-author of more than 25 white papers, jointly published by both MITRE and ATARC, following collaborative sessions during the ATARC Federal IT Summit Series. Topics of these educational symposiums include mobile technology, cloud and data center, cloud data and analytics, DevOps, cybersecurity, health IT, network transformation, and IoT. Please welcome our moderator for this panel, Tom Suter. Tom, all yours.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, thank you for all those accolades. I keep forgetting we did a lot of these things. It's weird to hear somebody talk about you that way. Thank you very much, and it looks like you've had a fantastic day. I saw Nick Shalon. The last panel was fantastic, and we're going to have to really live up to the hype with all that good stuff going on. But we don't have too much time here, so without further ado, I would love to introduce our panel today, and we'll start off with Mia Jordan. How are you doing today, Mia? Can you hear me? Mia, we're having a little audio, I think. While we're working through that, I will go to my next panelist, John Osborne. John, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
I can. So you're working from home, socially distant?
Yeah, we bought an old stone house that we haven't moved into yet, so I've been commandeered this as my office, but it's been working out as a escape so far. So yeah.
No, it looks like a nice work environment there. I like it. Yeah. Mia, did we have a chance to get you back on? Okay. Well, I've done enough of these to know there's always something. We'll work with the TSPi team to get Mia on, but maybe we'll just go ahead and, John, I'd love to have your perspectives. Coming from industry, you get a really cool opportunity to work with a lot of different agencies on DevSecOps, and it'd be great to hear your perspectives on what you see across government, and even if you can throw in anything from the commercial side, since you guys are working with a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's we are talking DevOps here, so we have to be agile. So hopefully Mia will join us back in. I did talk with her beforehand a little bit as well, so I can hopefully touch on some of the things that. Is that Mia's audio? Or?
Yeah, I think she might be getting on. Okay. Mia, I think you've got.
Okay.
I hear you. You might have to drop the phone. I think your camera's working fine.
I have no sound though coming out of my computer at this time. So okay. I'm gonna use the phone and turn the mic off.
Let's just go old school. Okay. Let's just use the phone. It won't be we'll just go ahead and do that.
Okay.
So all right.
Yeah,
okay.
No problem. We'll adjust. It's one of those things. But yeah, I'd say, we're probably 5 to 10 years into the DevOps movement in industry. I think public sector has a lot of unique challenges, because of the way the vast sprawl that we have, right? In terms of tooling, the pace of innovation, we have a lot of different systems integrators and other teams that we work with. And then, of course, in some of the high sides, right, you have different classifications and that everything's always connected to the internet, right? We've got air-gapped environments and those types of things. With DevSecOps specifically right now, I'd say if you take a step back and look at DevOps in general, it really just is a tool to solve a larger business outcome. And so if you look at some of what the commercial industry is doing, they're adopting a lot of the things from the lean movement. They're doing things like value stream mapping, where you can map out value and try to identify things like waste inside your environment. With DevSecOps, it's a way, especially in public sector, to bring in kind of a secure DevOps practice where you end up kind of baking things a lot of times into the platform, a lot of the things that would be part of compliance or the ATO process into the platform. Some of the things that I'm seeing with the public sector customers is some of the things that we work with customers on to try to help with is that we see customers getting a little bit lost in the weeds with kind of glue code and writing disparate tooling for all sorts of compliance practices and vendors. I would say too, like a little bit, it's kind of a high noise environment right now because there's all sorts of different security vendors and teams coming in and talking to customers and telling sometimes kind of conflicting languages there. But yet I think that one of the things that we're seeing on the bright side is that I do see a large effort in government right now to move from the traditional big bang releases to more of a modern development practices around getting fast feedback from users and then kind of making decisions around pivoted or persevering. A lot of those things that you see if you've read kind of lean startup model or human-centered design, a lot of the things that industry is doing from a development perspective. And some of the challenges of that, though, too, is that contracts aren't necessarily set up in government to do incentivize a path or smooth handoffs, right? And so, in industry, you probably heard of 2 pizza teams. That's how a lot of the DevOps high flyers are writing code and deploying it. And that becomes a challenge with contracts because everyone's not necessarily incentivized to make smooth handoffs in between teams. And I think that's one of the things that I was talking with Mia about, like what leaders can do, right? So a lot of in industry, they're moving towards APIs as kind of that handoff between teams. And so leaders can help kind of incentivize what those APIs or what that handoff might look like. Another thing that I talked about with Mia, hopefully when she joins back in, she'll be able to touch on this too, is that, I think one of the things that leaders can help with is setting clear goals and then measurements around what success looks like from an end-to-end process. And then, down in the weeds, people can work on things like automation. But a lot of times automation's hard and leaders can help with that too, because a lot of times the hardest part of automation is not actually writing code, but we're talking to complex systems, and even a lot of what we do is in people's heads, and getting those into clear steps that can be written as code can be very hard. And I think sometimes scary too, talking to systems can be hard, especially if there's all that different systems. Running down those steps can really be a challenge. A lot of times too, just from a learning standpoint, we learn very easily, but then we often forget, or things aren't necessarily codified in as part of the culture. So leaders can kind of help with that as well too. One of the things that Red Hat does is kind of think holistically end to end from a measurement. So we'll help kind of create APIs between teams, help customers adopt languages so that they're all speaking the same language between different teams, whether that's the networking team or the operations team or the security team. We'll help them focus on technical debt, and that's a big thing that leaders can help with as well. Prioritizing not just features, but technical debt as well, and then focusing on like the high value items. So we work with helping customers adopt things like the state of DevOps support, the 4 key metrics, using those as measurements, helping them avoid snowflakes and kind of the accumulation of technical debt, those types of things. But a lot of DevOps and DevSecOps is kind of the end-to-end flow, thinking of things holistically. If you talk to a lot of the new security folks and the new leaders that are coming in industry right now, they're thinking a lot about not just the initial security practices, but the continuous monitoring and the continuous remediation and kind of the day two part of that. And so I think that's really critical too, because, what we always say, good ops is good security, right? And so what we mean by good ops is that you have infrastructure that you can quickly rebuild. You have infrastructure as code. A lot of times that's containers or an immutable operating system, right? And that's really how you can do anomaly detection, because if you don't have a stable system, you can't monitor it, right? Because you don't know what stable looks like. And that's, I think, kind of where the puck is going for in the future. Do we have Mia back on yet? Or
I think we have Mia. We'll go to her in a second. I got to ask you, since we have a lot of practitioners that, higher level and lower level, what do you kind of go into a little depth? And I've heard the term before. I can ask you a lot of great questions, but the two pizza teams, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's an expression, but really what it means is that you have smaller teams, typically about 8 people. And the idea is that you have enough cross-functional skill sets to build an entire product end to end, and at least get it into production. But you're not so big that you start doing things suboptimally, but you're not too small that you don't have all the skill sets that you need to get things out there. And a lot of times, like with the 2 pizza team model, you do have cross-functional aspects of that. So you have someone that understands databases or operating systems or networking. You have all the skill sets you need on that 2 pizza team. But of course, you also need to hand things off to other teams as well, right? And so that's a lot of times where, traditionally in government, that's been a contract and some, other SI or something like that. But a lot of times in industry, that's an API. That might be Kubernetes, or that might be Ansible or something like that, or some other API. That might be a cloud API or Terraform, right? And so that's where I think where the government can try to make those handoffs more sustainable, because right now that handoff is a lot of manual work. It's a lot of process, and not necessarily as API driven as would like in commercial.
Yeah, I can definitely ask you some more questions about that, but we have Mia, Jordan, and Mia, don't feel too bad. I gave this wonderful keynote, and I realized there was some technical difficulties. After I gave my best stuff, after 20 minutes, they said, you need to do it again. So we worked around this. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Tom.
Yeah, we'll get a little feedback there. So Mia, Jordan has been in the federal government for a little bit here. She's currently in a new role. You can Google that. You can find her on LinkedIn. But I got to know her in her last role, which actually it was one of the, I think it was about a year ago, we had a low to no code event, and she was working over at USDA in the rural development category over there. And now you've gone through a transition. You were working at an agency, and then you get onboarded to a new agency. And if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about that transition in your talk. I'd love to hear a little bit about how that worked out when COVID and we're doing DevSecOps over at USDA.
It certainly was difficult. I'll tell you that, and I'm still around day 60 right now in terms of my transition. There's nothing like walking into a new organization where you don't get to see people, walk around and talk to people, and, kind of get that mouth to ear interaction, about what they do, how they do what they do. I'll just tell you, though, that the leadership at my new organization has put some things in place which honestly has made the transition smoother, and it's allowed me to really attempt to get up to speed rather quickly, at least in my last 30 days, in understanding kind of the business of the organization, but also, how my particular organization supports the business. So I'm still learning, still growing, and a lot more to learn for sure.
Yeah, and Mia, that's fantastic. One of the things that we talked about before is, we have the DevSecOps movement, and that's going really well. We've had some really good early government leaders like the Mark Schwartzes of the world, and we have Nick Shalon, who spoke earlier. Development of Platform One in the Air Force and the DoD. We also have low to no code platforms, and sometimes it's how do I integrate DevSecOps when I have a low to no code platform, and how do I get all this to work? Can you tell us a little bit about that dynamic? And it seems like in the DevOps community, some of them kind of aren't really, it's not the purity of the art or something when you actually build off of a low to no code platform. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because you've had some success in your career with both things, both methodologies.
Yeah. Sure. So I'll tell you, it wasn't a crawl, walk, run exercise for us. We ended up in a situation where our delivery timeline for many projects were kind of predefined, and we had to figure out a way to move literally at the speed of light to ensure that we could meet those administration priorities. And so it is not ideal how we ended up successful. There were a lot of bruises, and a lot of, after our I'm sorry sessions that occurred. But I'll just say, organizationally, moving to DevSecOps or DevOps, at least for those who run IT organizations, there's some great books out there that you can read. There's the Phoenix Project. There's the DevOps handbook. But I think the thing that I would leave with everyone is that you cannot go it alone as the IT organization. You really have to bring the rest of your organization along, because you are going to essentially not just retool how you do development and how you manage your applications and operations, but kind of all of the processes and all of the stakeholders around that process really need to understand the intended goal, the intended outcome, and where they fit in that picture. And so for us, our kind of DevOps journey started primarily on the development side of the house, and then we tackled kind of our operations and maintenance aspect, where we had to really kind of reimagine how operations was going to work with this new tool set, how we were going to deploy patches, how we were going to kind of insert security along the way. And that's a fundamental piece that often gets missed. In many organizations, you still see where everyone wants to kind of tack on security at the end and not really understand that DevOps is really about that every rotation around the moon is what I call those sprints, right? Every rotation around the moon, that security is, along for the ride. You cannot be successful with them coming in at the end. And so making sure that we had dynamic and static testing tools as a part of our DevOps journey was critical to our success. There's nothing like waiting until the end to understand that you have surprises waiting for you in critical and high vulnerabilities, right?
Right.
And then I think the other point that I'll make is kind of the what I'll call code analysis as well along the way, kind of understanding the quality of your code. That's a fundamental piece that I see missing in many tool sets, where you've got your requirements, you've got your development environment, your code repository, but we're not kind of checking the checker, so to speak, in terms of the quality of the product that we're taking on. And I think to John's point, what is the technical debt that we're ultimately assuming every time we release, right? Every time we go live, that needs to be well understood, because that as well has to be built into your model, those rotations around the sun, so to speak. So I'll pause there.
Yeah. And John, if you want to add some more, we got a question about technical debt and Mia touched on it. Do you want to add a little bit more there, which you touched on a little bit in your opening statements, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. If you actually look at some of the studies that have been out there, a lot of the security breaches are human error or customers' faults, and one of the things that I think makes patching and other things traditionally hard is that we don't actually always know what's running in production, right? Because a lot of times things ends up being kind of snowflakes. We didn't necessarily have good infrastructure as code or other good practices around when we released. And so if you go back, Mia mentioned the Phoenix project, but that was actually a modern day rewrite of a book called The Goal, which came out in the 80s. It's a great book on Audible if you get a chance to listen to it. And a lot of it was based around traditional lean manufacturing, like a pull-based architecture and kind of first in, first out, and thinking about things holistically through the flow. But the real work was done around lean, was around, or a lot of the studies and kind of takeaways from lean wasn't necessarily about the tools and the flow. It was about, they actually built this system, and there's kind of the paradox of it was that they created a real learning environment where learning was kind of key and forefront. But the paradox around it was that they had all these constraints in the environment, and the constraints were actually what enabled learning because they had a stable system. When you don't have a stable system, it's incredibly hard to measure anything because the measurements aren't very valid. It's hard to patch things. It's hard to monitor things because everything's kind of moving around in a very unstable way, and you don't necessarily know what the causes are for things like outages. And so going back to your original point, paying down technical debt is a really critical aspect to trying to the improvement of daily work, right? And so I think a lot of times when people, and this is the real challenge with, you start adopting Agile and DevOps, right? And a lot of people need to show progress right away because you're going to have naysayers. It's just part of it. And so the way people try to show progress is features, right? Just features. But you have to prioritize your technical debt too, or in the context of features, you're going to lose out on that. There's actually a really good book called The Flow Framework that we recommend as well. It was one of they keynoted at the DevOps Enterprise Summit this year as well. So that it kind of goes into like the percentages and the methodologies around what your technical debt should be. But in general, I'd say you probably at least 20% of your new code should be focused around better practices or fixing technical debt is kind of a table stakes measurement for it.
Yeah, fantastic. One thing I like to peek behind the curtains a little bit. I know doing development work, you have your CISO group and you know people in charge of ATOing your projects. DevSecOps really just turns all that stuff on its head. What has been the challenges to the security groups in these agencies, and how do they get themselves integrated? It's a completely different way to do this, and what should their role be? You know, in regards to DevSecOps.
Is that to me?
Mia? Yeah, I'll go ahead with Mia. You know, like what did you do at USDA? Yeah.
Sure, I'll start with that. I mean, you know, the way that I'll answer the question is to kind of touch upon what John referenced in terms of clear goals and measurements. And so some of those clear goals obviously are around, you know, why we put a CI/CD pipeline in place was really about ensuring compliance, right? Because just as a government entity, we need to make sure that, you know, we're checking the boxes on, you know, 508 compliance, IPv6 compliance, like all those kinds of things, right? Speed, obviously, I'll list as number 2, to move to a truly modular development life cycle. Oversight of vendors, I'll say, is like the third point, where before there are many organizations that have vendors that kind of do development outside of the government environment. And so implementing an open source tool set would allow us to have that immediate oversight of vendors and also have hands-on into the quality of the code, but also you know, the vulnerabilities that potentially might exist. And then you heard me mention before avoiding surprises, and those surprises and that oversight and insight was really key to our security organization, having literally hands-on keyboards and able the ability to see when code was checked in nightly, the scans that would take place, nightly, and those reports then that our CISO and his team would get on a regular basis really improve the communication between the security team and the development team. A lot of times it becomes extremely contentious, but also having an organization has to invest in its practices and the documentation of secure coding practices, right? And how those mechanisms are kind of built into either your SDLC or how you check for those things, along the different stage gates. And so all of those things is ultimately, I think, what allowed our security organization to adapt very quickly and also modify what used to be kind of stale, what I'll call stale processes into a true agile delivery model.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, what you brought up. Even though you're having these contentious arguments, it's better to have them early than wait till the end and then you got to redevelop everything because, you're better off having them along the way than at the end of the project. So very good. Yeah. And John, did you want to add anything to that? Oh, sorry. No, Mia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you must agree and adopt the mantra of failing fast. Yeah. And so we hear it, but do we do it?
Yep. And John?
Yeah, sure. So, I think if you look at the most important thing in your organization is probably going to be relationships, right? And so DevOps does kind of bring in a lot of the people-centered approach to relationships. So, collaboration, discussing your failures, those types of things. From a security perspective, you really need to build relationships with the security folks from the beginning. And I think what the security folks should be doing is getting away from just the compliance. The compliance and those things, the risk management frameworks, should be the table stakes. But looking at the context of how something is used, right? If something's running Windows 95 and it's got 1,000 vulnerabilities, but it's on an embedded board where nobody can touch it or access it, you have to consider the context of that. Moving forward, I think the security folks should work with good practices around, okay, yes, you've done the compliance, the risk management framework, but what's the best practice for that context, right? Continuous monitoring. How are you going to get patches out? Do you have the system that's going to be healthy enough to get those things out and patch at the cadence that matches the context of your system? And look at things more from just what would make sense for that individual system. Implement, countermeasures around simplification. Maybe their system's too complex for a good security posture, right? Simplify where automation might make sense, where refactoring might make sense, those types of things. But I think the most important thing is the relationship that you have with the security folks. And even, a lot of the customers I see that are moving more towards like continuous ATOs or, the more advanced ways to get code out, they have built really good relationships with the security teams. And the customers I see that don't have those relationships are the ones that are stuck, even if they can do everything else properly, because they're just going to hit a wall. And so you really have to build those things in from the beginning. That should just be day one, getting feedback from the security teams.
Yeah, and Mia, John started this discussion. We got a question about, how do you streamline that ATO process from a friend that will go unmentioned in one of our agencies. How would how did you guys do that at USDA? What's the process for that? Working with the security team, how did you guys get around some of that stuff, as far as that?
Well, I'll tell you that I had the privilege of early on when we were thinking about moving to DevOps as a discipline. I'll just give a shout out to USCIS because they were the leader, the front runner, really in the government. And I had an opportunity, maybe two opportunities, to engage with them and ask questions and learn. But I'll say that so when we kind of started the process, continuous ATOs was something that as a sub agency at USDA, we really had we didn't have the process and infrastructure in place from RD up to the department to make continuous ATOs a reality when we started on the journey. I'll give another quick shout out to Ms. Venus Goodwine. So since her arrival, she has been reimagining the cybersecurity process, and she is certainly a leader in her field as the CISO of USDA in really trying to figure and helping to change the model of security so that we can move to that. So I'll just say from a USDA perspective, we weren't there yet, but there were some great changes made that allowed achieving ATOs quickly and based on the premise of business drives cybersecurity. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I think she actually spoke at the last live event that we had here at ATARC back in March at the DevSecOps Summit. Yeah, she's fantastic. Where do we want to go? I go back to a little bit. One of the challenges we have that seems to be really in federal more than other places. And John, I'm stuck on pizza. The pizza. I had a birthday party last night. It's probably the first time I had pizza in a while. The two pizza teams, but the handoff to different contractors, how do you manage that? You have you just this medley of contractors that have to work and they have different responsibilities. And, your two pizza team just got something done and now it's going to another team. And, how is this really working? And what are some best practices about getting everybody on, getting all these disparate teams together and working together and, actually completing the project?
Yeah, it's so far I'd say it's one of those things where your mileage may vary, but I think one of the most important things, like if you're making a pyramid of needs, right, for DevOps, like one of the things at the very bottom is people in your relationships, and then after that it's probably measurements, right? And if you can't measure anything, you don't know what success looks like. And that's really where I think leaders need to come in, because I've literally seen handoffs where it's actually one SI on one side, it's the same SI on the other side, but it's a very large SI, and they're different teams. They don't actually know each other. They're on contract to do different things. And so even actually it's the same company, they actually have trouble doing the handoff. And this is where I think leaders need to come in, and actually more thought probably needs to come into actually how the contracts are written, and probably more of an API driven fashion for those handoffs. But then that's where I also need to get measurements so we can measure what's working and what's not working. Because if we don't have a stable system, we don't have measurements, then we're just kind of we're just kind of blindly walking through our deployments, right? And so having a stable system is really where kind of the table stakes for DevOps, because that's when we can start to push code faster. That's when we can focus on our constraints. We don't know what our constraints are if we're not even measuring anything, right? And so you go back to the State of DevOps report, they list these 4 key metrics, right? And so a lot of them required, how fast can you get new code into the system? How fast can you deploy, and those types of things. So it's measuring the system and having fast handoffs between teams is probably the table stakes things where leaders need to come in and kind of facilitate those conversations that need to happen. There's for those of you that like to read books, there's a book called Agile Conversations. It's really good on some of the things that can be done there as well. But even like the speaker listener technique, if you're familiar with that, is really helpful. So sometimes if you're talking to people, you're not actually speaking the same language, and it's just kind of like reiterating back, once they're done speaking, you reiterate back what they're said. But even that, I've seen basic things like that can help get to the bottom of, people's problems. But I think in industry, one of the things that they're doing now is value stream mapping, where you actually get everyone in the room to get together and you put a value stream map in. And there's a few big takeaways for it. The first is you build empathy, right? Because you actually see inside that black box of what those other teams are actually doing. But then it also helps eliminate waste. It looks for points where you might be able to get feedback loops faster in the process, engage other people faster in the process, see where the value is inside the flow from end to end. And so we've seen it done in public sector as well a few times, and it's worked really well. But I think we need a lot more of it going forward.
Yeah. And Mia, I think we're running out of time, but you'll have the last word on this topic. I'm really curious about what you're going to say.
Yeah, you saw me nodding violently over here. I'll just say this to kind of answer that question. The two pizza teams is a great analogy to kind of frame this discussion. You know, it's probably even more than that, probably 4 pizza teams, right, that ultimately can make it successful. But I'll say this to those technology leaders. You really have to understand the maturity of your organization in order to make this work. You know, you may have different layers in your technology stack where you have very mature teams. What has worked for me at my previous agency was that the government acted as that system integrator because to really kind of tamp down the noise, right, between vendors. And where we acted as that system integrator was at that API layer was really to make sure that, you know, what was happening at the UI ultimately was going to flow correctly to back-end systems. And so I'll just stress that, you know, really understanding where you need to grow your staff is critical to getting to a place where you can really kind of take DevOps on by the horn, so to speak, and making that investment early versus like me, where, you know, I was given a 3-month window to get an application out, and I had to, you know, you make some mistakes. And so if you have the time and the luxury of not having a lot on your plate, this is the time to really kind of start taking that journey slowly and thinking about the strategy to get to your end state.
Great. Well, that'll be the final word. Thank you, Mia and John. And that was a great discussion.
Great presentation. That was terrific. I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion and the programming and will come away from today's sessions with some valuable insights and ideas. Again, I think I want to thank all of the presenters, all of the moderators. This was really a terrific exchange of information. Now let's bring back on board the founder and CEO of TSPi for a few closing thoughts. Vishal, welcome back on board.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you again to all of our federal speakers, participants, and certainly the sponsors. What a great discussion. It's pretty clear that the future of federal technology is certainly poised to continue to rapidly evolve. I think that's part of the reason why we love what we do, is that each day brings a new set of challenges that sometimes stumble us, but as they say, future remains bright, and we come up with solutions that we feel proud about. So with that, I hope our next Public Sector Series event next year will be in person. And I personally, and on behalf of everybody at TSPi, look forward to welcoming all of you to that. Thank you again, and have a great day.